Great. So a warm welcome, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today on the Managing Employee Health and Wellbeing webinar. My name is David.Hudson, and for those of you that haven't joined one of our webinars, I'm delighted to have you here. So we're going to focus in the next hour on employee health and wellbeing. Particularly, we're going to look at employee mental health. And as you'll probably know from your own experiences or the organisations that you are in, the whole mental health piece at the moment is front of mind for people because of all really of the impact of things that are happening around us. For the last 24 months, obviously, we've been dealing with COVID, and most recently, the very sad situation in Ukraine. And the other, the other things happening around the world means that people more than ever are feeling fragile, and that's impacting ultimately on work because they will be spending a majority of their time mostly at work. So for us as a HR team, this is an area that we have been dealing with constantly for the last 12 to 18 months. So what we want to do is to try and share with you hopefully some insights into what's happening in the market, but then also to give you some more practical tips around how to deal with your own team. So during this webinar, what I'll be talking about is spotting the early warning signs around employee mental health, and then thinking a bit about what are the employer responsibilities, how you respond, how you should respond to concerns raised by your employees. And then we're going to have a quick look at what are the employment law angles that we need to think about when we're dealing with employee mental health and well-being. And finally, we're going to finish with looking at some practical ways to manage mental health and well-being in your own workplace or your team, and then have some time later for questions. So that's the plan for the next hour. A bit of an introduction to who I am. My name is David.Hudson. I'm the owner-founder of the HR department, and we look after businesses in West London. You'll see from this fairly colourful picture that my career has been initially in retail, and then I moved into HR early and finished about 3 years ago now as a corporate head of people for a multinational and international property company with about 16,000 employees. I run the HR department, very ably assisted and working alongside Kirsty, who's with us today, who will be monitoring the chat and letting people in. So thank you for that, Kirsty. And I have a range of experience in different areas. When I'm not working, I guess more interestingly, you'll see there, I am a water polo fanatic, so I play in goal and I love to scuba dive. So just a little bit about me and what I bring to this party. So we like our webinars to be very interactive, and because of that, what I'd like you to do is grab your mobile phone and on the screen there, you'll see a string in red, which is an address that's going to help us going to use the interactive polling to do interactive polling. I'm going to ask Kirsty to recopy and paste the link into the chat. So if you just click onto that, that should come up on your mobile phone. And when we get to a couple of the polling questions, we will be using that to just gauge some views. So that link is there now. Otherwise, if you just want to use, as say, your mobile device, then if you simply tap in the long string in there in red, you will get into the app. So I'll give you a couple of seconds to do that. While you're doing that, just to say, we also love to kind of have these as interactive as they can be. So please use the chat function as we go. Please share any questions you've got, and also, do please also feel free to share your own business details and connect with other people in the room, because as business owners, management and other people, you will invariably find someone here that you could probably share with. So do please take that opportunity to share your own details. Okay, so I think then without further ado, let's move on to the first question, which is over to you. So which of the, using your Participole app, I'd like you to tell me which of the following is impacting employee mental health and well-being in your business or team. So is it A, the crisis in the Ukraine, B, increasing COVID cases, fear of health, worry about how secure roles are, or E, increasing workloads? So be interested to hear what's impacting you in your workplace. If you could choose one of those options, give you 5 seconds to do that. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Perfect, and it works, which is good news. Always horrendous when there's a technology foul in these webinars. So increasing COVID cases, yes, absolutely. A worry about future roles and increasing workloads. Yeah, good, absolutely. Really mirroring, I think, what I'm hearing from my my clients at the moment. Let me share with you, just before we move on, what we know from employees. So this is the results of a survey that was completed by the CIPD, the Health and Wellbeing at Work Survey. And what it gives us here is just a quick snapshot of the reasons why people are off from work at the moment. And you'll see, and it's not changed, that the main reason tends to be musculoskeletal, so backache, bone aches, muscle problems, and that's still at the minute trending at about 76% of the reasons. But what's very interesting, that what sits around that is that 46% of employees are complaining about sleep problems, 41% of employees about anxiety, for example, and depression at 26%. And what's interesting about this, when we think about what our employees are telling us, is that it means that invariably these conditions are affecting people in and around your teams and your workplace. And I suppose one of the big messages here is that mental health and well-being and health and well-being are often areas that people won't just readily talk about, but that they will be dealing with every day. And so one of the things I want you to really think about is how are you making sure that you're setting a culture in place that gives people the chance to feel safe and to come to you, with these issues that they may be experiencing, whether that's in work or out of work. And if you are doing anything really creative, do please share that on the chat so that we can start to understand maybe where people are doing things differently that help. But that at the moment is the view from employees. In terms of health, one of the things we're also noticing is that although we're trying to obviously put the pandemic behind us, although that proves to be difficult where the infection rates continue to rise and fall, as you may be following, what we are seeing is that the whole COVID piece is just never going to go away, because we're starting to see potential impact from the longer term issues associated with being ill with COVID, which, as you may know, is referred to as long COVID. And there is a suggestion that that will in itself be covered by the Equality Act. And I'll talk a little about the Equality Act in a little bit. But from a health perspective, I guess what I'm seeing more practically is people are very keen to put COVID behind them, but you do need to be aware that unfortunately, in some guise or other, COVID's here to stay. And this will be an area that you'll want to keep your eyes on, where maybe people are starting to receive diagnoses that they are suffering from long COVID. And really all you can do at this stage is make sure your managers and yourselves are equipped to spot that, to be alive to that if people are telling you, and then talking to me, for example, if that comes up around how then that should be managed. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we spot the warning signs for employee mental health. And one of the challenges with mental health in the workplace is that it still unfortunately carries some stigma, and people are still unfortunately a little maybe hesitant about coming forward and sharing that they're maybe not in a great place. The adage of often that I use, if someone's got a broken leg, we can see the broken leg, we will deal with it, and hopefully that person moves to recovery. Whereas with mental health and well-being, often we will not see that person is suffering with a condition or something's happening for them. and therefore it's missed. And it's when it's missed that the issues really start to inflate. So it's always important to make sure that we don't just assume that because people are turning up and working that everything's all right. And this is where we have to start to make sure we're having the proper check-ins with employees and asking those questions around how are you feeling, what's happening for you, and the more informal conversations that help start to draw issues out early. So what I'm interested to know is your own experience, really, when you have a colleague that is maybe experiencing anxiety or distress or a challenging mental health condition. How do you know as the manager or in your workplace that those things are happening? So it'd be great to pop your thoughts in the chat just to get a little bit of chat going. So how do you know that these things are maybe surfacing for your employees? Do please share your, your thoughts. Good, yeah. Great shout there from James. Regular formal supervisions and informal monitoring. Yeah, good. How else might you be? Recognizing those early warning signs? Any other thoughts? Kirsty, we've talked about this a bit. How do you sometimes pick these things up that maybe someone's not quite where they would usually be? Unusual attendance, yeah, absolutely. Regular chats, good. Snappy, moody, yeah, good. Good, yeah. Not focused, thank you, Angela, yeah, absolutely. Good, okay, good. Thanks, that's really good. And the point here is really that you have to spot these things early to help them and the employee to stop deteriorating further. And often where issues come to us, they will come to us because things have gone on, not been dealt with, and the employee suddenly maybe has an outburst or is absent, as Harnack suggested there, in terms of absence patterns, and it can sometimes almost be a little late. So do please make sure, as you're saying here, and well done to you, because you are obviously facing into it, which is brilliant, but do please make sure you keep close to your team. Just to reshare a bit, again, another recent survey talks about top causes of stress. I'm sure none of these things will be of any surprise, and I'm sure if I went around the room and asked you what you identified with as your main reason for stress, it's probably one of the things listed on these screens. What really this draws out for us, I think, is that all of these reasons for stress at work either point to directly or indirectly, or mainly point directly or indirectly to how people are being managed at work. And the other thing that the pandemic, as we know, has really exasperated is this whole working at home culture, where people are maybe not getting the right pastoral support or having the coffee chats, the coffee point chats. And therefore, again, issues are not coming to the fore. So it's really important that you just think a little bit about, where is your team in this? Am I managing individuals to the extent that they feel like they are supported, they feel like they've got an outlet? Because what these figures suggest is that we as management are probably not quite getting it right. Some of the more obvious risk factors that you will be wanting to look out for, and many of which you've highlighted here in your responses, but the risk factors that exacerbate poor mental health and well-being will be around long working hours, mental health conditions, home life security, lone working. Arguably, I think what we see with the pandemic is that actually that in itself created a mental health crisis, where people started to realize that working at home was just simply not good for their health. So do keep your eyes open for the risk factors. We, as always, have to be wary that where the work-life balance, was a piece that we talked about a lot. There's probably an interesting debate to be had around, is there such a thing as a work-life, or has work and life blended together because we're working at home, for example, or we're working more flexible hours? What we are finding through some of the research we're getting is that actually people are struggling to find that balance. And it is a new way of working. I think people, from my observation, are finding their feet. And you will just want to keep close and check in with people to understand if they are managing that balance, and if they're not, how you can work together to make it better. But it is certainly calling, I think, for some different thinking around how we're managing our people. But if you are spotting these risk factors, if you are going through some of these things, and many organizations, for example, I'm working with at the moment, are going through some big change because of coming out of the pandemic. Many organizations are working long hours to try and get back into this growth situation and get themselves back in order. So just those two things alone will be creating anxiety for people. And when you put these other things around it, it is a recipe potentially for a lot of stress for our people. So let's look a little bit in more detail about how those signs show themselves. There are 3 areas that I'd want you to be thinking about where you can identify that maybe there are some changes in the employee's behavior that might suggest that they are suffering with some kind of additional burden or with their own mental health challenges, and starting with the physical signs. And those things maybe will not be so apparent. So fatigue and headaches, for example, might be things that people say in passing to you. Sometimes people will drop that sort of comment into a conversation just almost to subconsciously flag that they're maybe not in the right place. So look out for those cues. Other things will be changes in sleep patterns, sweating, people's appearance looking drawn or red or pale. They will be evidence that individuals are maybe at the start of or dealing with mental health and well-being challenges. So look out for those signs is the message here. Now, those things are really obvious, sometimes so obvious that I think sometimes we miss actually what's in front of us. The other point I always say to my clients and to people generally is we are not physicians, we are not psychologists or medics, we're not, and I'm certainly not medically trained. And so we have to be very wary of attaching labels to situations because of what we perceive is going on, or because there's a sign that is shown that actually isn't related to something that we've decided it might be. So be careful and avoid any diagnoses on your own of what people may be working through. Again, I'm sorry to keep repeating this, but it is pretty basic. The only way really is to get in and start talking to people if you're picking up these physical signs. The more psychological signs that you may have experienced from the team will be things like mentioning that they are anxious and stressed. Other signs can be that people can lose their humor. They can start to maybe work at the more extreme ends of the emotional responses scale. So being more tearful, where they may be more fun to be with, they suddenly become less humorous or less inclined to contribute. All of those things, again, I would want you to think are signs that you should maybe go back and talk to the individuals just to find out how they're doing and whether there's anything that's maybe dumbing down their behavior that they might want to talk to you about. So, and then the third area to really think about is the behavioral, which is more really around how people are obviously behaving generally. And the sort of presentation of this generally tends to be increased use of alcohol and substance usage. And I certainly am encountering this through the work I'm doing with clients. It's interesting that during the pandemic, it was suggested that 25% of people were drinking alcohol as a way to cope with lockdown, and that 36% of people were actually eating more than they would usually, as a way again of trying to deal with some of the lockdown pressures. So, these are real things. These things are happening. Unfortunately, when you get into some of these areas, people really will be challenged, and that's where, as I said, you've got to be very careful about diagnosing. But you might, in the conversations you have, want to start thinking about where you can help people to point out to different types of support resources. And I'm going to touch on that at the end. So do share any comments you have or any questions that you've got, and I will come back to those. So you don't be shy. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about what are the employer's responsibilities for mental health and well-being. And it's a complex relationship, as you would expect. But nonetheless, there are very clear requirements that we as employers have. The first being the health and safety regulations, which look to deal with work-related stress. And it's an unusual place, some people think, for stress-related legislation to sit, but nonetheless, that's where it is, and it's seen to sit in that legislation because it is health-based and there is a risk. Hence, why it's in the health and safety legislation. So, beyond that, the bigger piece really is your responsibility as the employer of duty of care for your people. So. And that again can sometimes have blurred lines, around how far practically do we go to support our employees, and what does that mean? What does support look like? But duty of care, if you like, is the core component of your relationship with your employees, and it does therefore tie you into situations where, if there are issues outside of work in terms of mental health and well-being that are impacting work, you do have to face into them. The other area that is maybe a bit of a potential landmine, if you like, is making sure that you are not inadvertently using discriminatory practices in the way that you deal with your people. So an example of that might be that you always have team meetings in the evening at 5, and that might unintentionally mean that people with childcare responsibilities can't attend. Or it might be the case, and this is an interesting one that comes up, has come up quite often recently, where team meetings are held in pubs or wine bars, and employees don't attend because maybe their own beliefs, religious or otherwise, say that they don't drink, and so therefore they don't feel comfortable to attend. So when thinking about mental health and well-being, really, it's thinking about what are we doing that makes sure we are as inclusive as we can be in the practices that we are, promoting, and ethical considerations. There will be issues that are, for example, one of the big ethical issues during COVID was: should employees be vaccinated? How do we deal with that? Or, do we make people travel to work? And all of the things I'm sure you've worked around in some way or other. But from a mental health and wellbeing perspective, you do have to think ethically about how are you operating, and is that inadvertently having any negative impact on the team, or on your people. So there are big responsibilities there, and within each one of those, there is the potential that if you're not fulfilling it as you should be, that the employee can take some level of claim, be that a claim for discrimination, which is what we call a day one claim, or a claim against duty of care, where they feel the relationship's broken down, which could then lead to an unfair dismissal or constructive dismissal claim. So I'm going to talk now a little bit about how we respond to employees when they tell us that they're not happy. Now, this is an area, if you like, that I think, when I think practically about the last 12 months, this has been one of the areas that I have seen my clients get really stuck in, if you like. And one of the things that I think particularly has come to the fore is, how do we respond to people that tell us that they are suffering with anxiety or depression, or there are things going on outside of the workplace that is really impacting them in the workplace. What it's also shown, really, I think, through the pandemic is that workplaces and managers were just not well equipped for responding to employee mental health and well-being challenges. So I've broken it down maybe a little bit oversimplistically, but this works. This formula for me is tried and tested. This approach works well. And first and foremost, it's about recognizing the signs. And so many times I've heard managers say, well, actually, when I piece things together, I could see things weren't quite right. So it's recognizing the signs early is key. And then it's about culture. So creating this open culture that really promotes and supports people when they are in a position where they maybe need a little bit more of our help, that they feel they can come forward. Now, I know that sounds really super obvious, but you will be surprised that sometimes employees, don't see that, or are maybe hesitant because the employer is not saying to them simply, if you are suffering and you want to talk, then come and talk to us. So it's really surfacing the agenda and talking to employees. And in some of the really sort of sensitive areas, really and truly, I think the best way to create these open cultures is to tell people that you want them to come to you, and that maybe you won't get it right first time. Maybe there's some way to go around mental health and well-being in your workplace, but at least that you're listening. And by them knowing that you're listening, you'll start to build a further level of trust and openness that hopefully will then help get into situations early on. And then finally, providing the right support. And I'll talk a bit at the end of this webinar about some of what those practical support tools might be. But my message to you here is that proactive is so much better than reactive. And, it can seem a bit of an unwieldy beast, this area. And all I would say to you is doing something's better than doing nothing. So, just go and tell your people that they should be open with you. And I see from some of the comments that you are anyway, which is really brilliant. But sometimes we just need to also reinforce this stuff more regularly, and not if you like, expect people will just guess that that's the position that we're in. One of the other interesting and more practical challenges that I've observed is the intersection between where an employee maybe is dealing with mental health challenges and where then it impacts their performance. And that's been quite a lot of discussions in the last 12 months, where managers will come to me and say they're not performing, they're not achieving their targets or their KPIs. There's a little bit of short-term absence. They do tell me sometimes they're struggling to get out of bed, and one thing and another. And what managers are not quite doing maybe is either piecing it together to see the picture, or being confident about how to deal with that. So my guidance around that really is, if an employee tells you that the reason for their underperformance is because they are dealing with a mental health challenge or something that's impacting their ability to perform, then think carefully about how you respond to that, because your initial response to that is really, in my experience, going to be a determinant between that conversation going well and that employee feeling supported and in a non-judgmental situation, versus well, okay, I get it, I'm sorry you're not sleeping, but actually I still think you should be performing better than you was. Only really for me tends to go into a downward spiral. And I call that out because I do see both of those approaches often. So where your employee is telling you that, it isn't, if you like, and I mean this with respect, but it isn't a joker card that means everything else has to stop and that becomes the thing. What it is an important flag for you to deal with the mental health and well-being challenges, but to do that in a way that also enables the employee to perform. So importantly, discuss the issues with the employee, discuss the performance requirements, and then create a plan between the two of you that looks to maybe tackle the health and wellbeing piece. And that could be something that I'm going to talk about next around how we do that around adjustments, and then put the right support and monitoring mechanisms in place to hopefully see them get back into, into the space that they need to be. Now, again, I will say I appreciate that's probably glaringly obvious, but what I do sometimes see is managers struggling, if you like, to find where, if at all, the join is between managing mental health and wellbeing and managing performance, and knowing how to find that blend. And the simple answer, although these situations are never simple, let's face it, is that you need to tackle both, and you need to do it in a way that's right, that ultimately focuses on getting that employee back into a good space. Now, it might be, unfortunately, that isn't the outcome despite your best efforts. And again, if you are in those situations, that's where you should talk to me, and I can advise you, on that. But I will tell you, having given this guidance a lot in the last 12 months, that done well, it really does become quite satisfying to work with the employee to get them not only to perform, but also to hopefully get into a better space. And some of that will be about thinking outside of the box. So one of the first questions you'll want to ask, and that I will want you to think about, is what are the reasonable adjustments that you might be able to make that help that employee, even if it's in the short term, to maybe feel better, if you like, to fulfill their duties more fully, so that there's some flexibility. Really, you're demonstrating that you're being sympathetic, if you like, to the situation, and in doing that, thinking about how you might be able to light load some tasks, maybe give them something else to support them, have another team member work alongside them that continues to point them into this objective of getting to the right space. I've shared here with you what some of those reasonable adjustments might be. So you might want to think about flexible hours. So some quick examples here. It wasn't uncommon that employees were not comfortable about using public transport during COVID. And so one of the things some of my clients was doing was offering later starts or earlier starts, which actually, when it came down to it, wasn't impacting the client work they were doing, and actually was helping the employee feel more, more comfortable about using public transport. It can sometimes be, for example, changing targets. So if it's the reality that people really are, really are struggling, then sometimes just a short-term review of targets and taking some of the burden out of that will help people just feel a little bit less, if you like, weighed down from what they feel like is the overbearing requirements of work. So sometimes look at the targets. In some instances, sometimes people just need some time off, and there are mechanisms you can use, unpaid leave, paid leave, and all of those other things. But sometimes people just need some time away. And that might be something that then you can offer. They go off with your blessing, come back feeling maybe more refreshed and a bit more recuperated. So that might be an option. And finally, as I said to you, just picking out some of these things that you're not going to be the panacea of all the answers for everything, right? And I know as management, sometimes it feels like you should be, but that's not going to be the case. So it's knowing where to go sometimes to get the right support. Examples will be to external resources like the Samaritans, or using occupational health in an organization to help have medically trained staff provide you with a more objective view of what's happening with that individual. But don't try and deal with all of these things you're on your own. And I've been there and done that. I've got a lot of line management and leadership experience, and yeah, you can sometimes do, I think, more harm than good. All I would say to you is that the sharper end of this is that you have to be seen to be doing something. From a baseline perspective, there is a potential, there is a potential risk if you're not demonstrating duty of care that the employee can take action. But there's a bigger agenda here, which is about you as the employer, your moral responsibilities, how you want your organization to be seen. If an employee comes and tells you that they're not doing, great. So yeah, inaction is not an option, is all I would say. Okay, I'm going to stop for a moment and just check to see if we've got any questions. No questions as yet. Hopefully you're all still there. I can't see you, so I might be talking to myself, but hopefully you are all still there. Right, so over to you. So I want you to think about this question and use your participole. I'm going to ask Kirsty to drop the link again, if you haven't had it, into the chat function, please. And my question to you is, do you think, can an employee take you to tribunal if work is making them stressed or anxious, or they're suffering from a mental health condition? So use your participole link, and it's either A for yes, please, or B for no. I'll give you a few more seconds for that. B. Thank you, Angela. Okay. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Great. So 2 for yes, 2 for no. Interesting. So we have a split. View. The answer is yes. An employee can, and I'm going to talk about the reasons for that in a bit. But essentially, it's back into this point that I raised. This slide that I showed you earlier, which is that. And I'm just trying to find it for you. In any one of these areas of legislation or of how the employment relationship is legislated, if you foul, then there is a potential that you can be taken to tribunal. So that's the hard edge. And we often say that for a tribunal that is maybe an unfair dismissal that's fairly straightforward, you're probably looking at about £20,000 worth of cost, let alone probably about 6 months of quite intense time and focus. And that's at the easier end of tribunals. So that's why some of this stuff, albeit fairly straightforward, is worth just making sure while you've got the ability to control it, that you actually are doing so. So my question around what action can employees take? The first thing employees will do is that they'll start to withdraw their own discretionary effort. So I'm sure you've had experience of this, but people will maybe not be working so late, or a random here, but we'll say to you, I'm going to have my lunch every day, or things will start to people will start to work to rule, if you like, and from that start to detach from colleagues. And this is, as I mentioned earlier, where you're starting to get into a space where it becomes more and more difficult to almost regain ground with people if they're starting to act in this way. And absences, as some of you have pointed to earlier, will invariably be an alarm, an alarm bell. Any constant short-term absences, really don't ignore those. On the more formal front, then employees have the opportunity to raise grievances, and in the grievances that I've dealt with in the last, the last 12 months, definitely one of the common themes is employees feeling under-supported or feeling picked out in situations and isolated. So, these things are happening, and once you get into the grievance territory, it is, I think, potentially a slippery slope. And then they can resign. They can resign and claim unfair dismissal, i.e., you've done something that is going to mean that they're not just simply not in the in the space they expected to be. You've treated them unfairly. You could do something that for them is so is so bad that they see the employment terminating, and that's the constructive dismissal piece. So they can claim for that. And then finally, they can claim disability discrimination. Now, the Equality Act is really where the final, the third piece, the disability discrimination piece, that's where that centers on. So it's useful to know that any condition that might be impacting an individual over the course of a 12-month period generally, and impacting their day-to-day activities, may be classified as a disability. So mental health conditions will absolutely fall within that realm. And so you just want to be careful of just not brushing it off, if you like, as it's just a period of depression, or it's just this, or it's just that. If it's really impacting people, as I said, it could well be covered under the Equality Act. Bear in mind that whilst unfair dismissal and constructive dismissal are claims that employees have to make once they've resigned, they have a 3-month window, and that's generally after 2 years service. With disability discrimination and the other protected characteristics, that is what we call a day one claim. So as soon as someone starts working for you, if they are experiencing that, then they have the right to go to tribunal. And in the worst case, that in itself can be an uncapped award. So there's a very heavy price tag attached to, to discrimination in that disability discrimination. Okay. So as we kind of move on to the finish, I just want to leave you with some of the more practical steps that you can use to manage mental health and well-being. So from these are if you take nothing away from this, these are the things really that I want you to think about as putting you in a good place in your organization. So promote a culture where people can share their concerns. That's really important. Have the right tools in place to support employee mental health and well-being. I'm going to share what some of those might be in a moment. Have the right policies and procedures in place. And as dry as it may sound, one of the big things that people have come unstuck on is a lack of good absence management policies or processes, for example, and where they are in place, them not being followed. That is something I come across very often. So make sure not just that the policies are in place, but that they're being followed. And finally, training managers to handle difficult situations. And I think for me, where rubber hit the road this last 12, 18 months has been showing that line managers have understandably been very, very sensitive around dealing with mental health and well-being challenges. And I absolutely get it. But we do need to equip them to, not just to pick up the things we've talked about, but around how to progress them in a sensitive and constructive way. The other big thing that's quite interesting is I want you to think about physical health and well-being. And you will have seen some of the stuff that I've been publicizing, for example, is all about recognizing where people might be in their own journey, in their own life journey. So recently we pushed a load of stuff out around menopause in the workplace, as an example. Some of the issues, that we are watching unfold on the news, in terms of the Ukrainian situation, is impacting people, and people sometimes may be related to or have direct connection with some of the people in Ukraine, or that have moved out of the country. And so there might be a need there for trauma counselling or bereavement counselling, as another example. So when you're thinking about physical health and well-being, think about how are we supporting people in different places so that we can help them not feel so alone or isolated or unsure about how to tackle some of these big, meaty life issues. Flexible working definitely is here to stay. I get mixed responses about flexible working, but it does show, it is proven that if people have some flexibility, they tend to be more productive and more effective because they're not feeling like they're fighting against, their job. And finally, to promote the right culture where people can share their health concerns. Quick stop here. Reality is we're not all working in an office. I think some of us, from what we said earlier, are all at home, which is as it is. That's the kind of new world, dare I say. And so if you are managing virtual employees, the need to think about the duty of care, their mental health and well-being still remains. That doesn't go away irrespective of where people are. So when I send you this slide deck, what you've got here are some things to think about when you're managing remote workers. And one of the things, again, I'm sorry to keep referring to it, but one of the things that the pandemic really drew out was that management became very operational. Have you done this? Is this finished? When's that project starting? And that's in itself, I think, been where some of these issues have been exasperated around people feeling, not just feeling alone, but then feeling like their managers are just not really aware of that or wanting to face into it. So do look out for those signals. It is more difficult via Zoom, as we know, or Teams or whatever else you're using, but nonetheless, make sure you're giving it some thought when you're dealing with your remote workers. So finally, what are the things at hand to support you? The Employee Assistance Programme is a terrific, if you like, service where employees can ring an independent number away from people like me and people like you as employers, that is confidential, and people can have open, frank conversations with brilliant people that will either signpost them to different organizations or to different resources. Occupational health is, I'm using that quite a lot at the moment. They're again a really great resource if you want to get a handle on why people have been absent and maybe they themselves are telling you they have a condition. That's where occupational health comes in. And mental health first aiders is also on the rise, I think. So more really where this agenda is becoming more, being pushed more up organizational priorities. Organizations are taking hold of that and appointing mental health first aiders, which I've seen work well. And finally, training. Training is always going to be a good way to make sure we equip our managers with the right skills that they need. And then externally, there's some brilliant resources out there. Mind is one, Rethink Mental Illness, the Fit for Work advice line. I know some of you that have joined today are working in particular areas, and I know you also have some really brilliant external resources that you can offer. And do please, genuinely, as I've just said, share your links or share your any other information you want within this webinar so we can all maybe benefit from those. So in conclusion, really, this whole thing is going to be something we will just keep talking about. I do this webinar probably once every 6 months. I get good attendance with different people because this is always a live challenge for our clients and employers. And if you really get into the kind of the heart of making sure that your employees are happy, are feeling supported, are being listened to, and have the right outs, if you like, so that they can share any concerns or frustrations they've got, or any more sensitive information about what might be impacting their performance, then you are in the right place. And I would just again implore you that don't do nothing, just do something. Tell people that you're doing it. You don't have to be on the level of sophistication like a Microsoft or a Google or an Amazon. But if you're at least letting people know that it is safe for them to share if they're not feeling great, then you are going to be a good way there. So just to end, a little bit about who we are. We are the HR department, as you know, and our business is all about supporting local employers to take the hassle out of managing people. So we do everything from providing contracts of employment right the way through to recruitment support, training, board level support, employment law, and all of the other things that essentially you would go to a HR department in-house to do. We do, but we are your outsourced HR provider. And all of that's underpinned by a fabulous insurance, employment tribunal insurance. And as I said earlier, when some of those tribunals are about £20,000 a pop, it is, it does come into its own. I really appreciate you connecting with us. We are active, as you know, in this with webinars. I love to get out and hopefully share and help local businesses. We've got a full program coming for the next 3 months. In May, we're going to be looking at how to recruit and also how to consider succession in what I know is an extraordinarily challenging market. And then we do run training courses. And that first training course in May is going to be on how to effectively manage your recruitment and to get the right candidates. And then into June and July, all of this is on the website, and I will share with you when I follow up with the slides links to some of these events, but do please keep your eyes on the website because these will be there for you to book as well. So it only really remains to say thank you so much for connecting in with us. If you have any questions, we've got 5 minutes. I'm conscious of time. Feel free to drop them in the box, or I'm going to stick around until 1. As I said, I will share the slides with you. And after this, I'm going to send you our mental health guide. And it would be great to have a coffee and talk about, any of these areas in particular that impact your business. So with that, I'm going to say we're done. And again, thank you for coming along. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Harnik. Appreciate that. Hey, Kathleen, yes, I will send you I'll send you a PDF of the slides from today. Thanks, Angela. Great. Cool. Thanks, James. And I hope your events go well this afternoon. Yes, we have a certificate we can send for sure. Thanks, Kathleen. Yes, of course. Kirsty, are you jotting these things down here? Thanks. Thanks, James. Great to meet you. Yeah, sure. We'll absolutely get the PDF slides out to you, no problem at all.